Hello, and welcome to Your Estate Matters with your hosts, my colleague Greg Brenand and myself, Nicole Garton of Heritage Trust.
Your Estate Matters is a podcast dedicated to everything estates, including building and preserving your legacy.
If it's estate related, we'll be talking about it. We're having the conversations today that will help Canadians protect their families, their assets, and their legacies tomorrow. Allison, thank you so much for being here today to talk with us about estate property sales.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm happy to be here.
So, what should someone look for when they're choosing a realtor for an estate sale?
Well, the first thing is the realtor really needs to understand the probate process. They have to understand who is the seller, who is the executor, is it an individual or is it a corporation? Because that will then lend itself to what documentation that we need. So we need to start with a copy of the will, copy of the death certificate, executor documents, probate documents, and then our FINTRAC documents would be dictated whether it's individual or if it's corporate, then we have to do corporate FINTRAC documents.
So our listeners at home might not know what FINTRAC is.
So FINTRAC is the legislative documentation that we have to do on the seller. So if the seller is personal, it's fairly straightforward documents we need to do with, identification. If it's corporate, then we need all the corporate records. We need to know who the officers, directors are of the company because we have to personally FINTRAC the owners of the company as well. So it's the same process. There's just a bit more paperwork. That's all. The other thing that the realtor really needs to understand is how to handle an accepted offer that is subject to probate if probate has not yet been obtained. Because a lot of the agents, I find that we have to educate the buyer's agent in how to draft an offer that's subject to probate because not all agents have a good working understanding of estate sales. And the other thing that we like to know is who are the beneficiaries and what role do they play in the decision-making process of the estate sale.
So for listeners at home that might not know, probate is essentially a stamp from the BC Supreme Court on a will confirming that the court believes that it's the valid will and it's the last will of the deceased and that the executor has authority to deal with estate assets.
Yeah, so we just generally have to explain to the buyer's agent or the buyer that we cannot complete on the sale until the letters of probate have been granted. So we kind of have to work with, the completion date from your side of things, and then it's actually a mutual subject, the subject to probate for the buyer and the seller.
So what I'm hearing you say is it's important to choose a realtor that has familiarity with that particular process.
Yes.
Allison, what are some of the tasks associated with selling an estate property as an executor?
Well, the first thing is you want to assess the property condition. So you want to obviously do a walkthrough of the property. You want to determine if there are repairs or improvements that need to be done, or is the property potentially a tear down. The other thing that we find is helpful is the seller or the executor could consider doing a pre-listing home inspection because this would, one, identify any areas of concern that maybe we need to remedy, or two, it is a document that we can actually provide to the purchasers. And I've found when we've used the pre-listing home inspection in the past, it's been very helpful to the buyers to give them this information. Because on an estate sale, the estate will not generally sign a PDS, a property disclosure statement, because it's just not in the interest of the estate, but more importantly is the estate's never lived in the property. So they're not going to complete a property disclosure statement, which lists, all the issues or whatever they know about the property. But the one thing that we do need to disclose is material latent defects. So those are defects that you can't obviously see. Like an example would be a suite that isn't authorized, or if there was an oil tank on the property. So we would always recommend to the estate that we also scan for an oil tank. And the only other thing is maybe trying to obtain the municipal building file so that we can find out if there's any building permits or outstanding work orders, make sure that there's final occupancy on the home, just really doing our due diligence as best we can because we don't have a seller to ask these questions to.
So some of those steps sound expensive, particularly getting the pre-sale inspection. So what are the general costs that someone might expect in getting an estate property ready for sale?
Probably the biggest costs, as you say, are getting that, if you want to go to the expense of a pre-home inspection and then getting an oil tank scan. I would say those are the two biggest expenses for the estate and getting the home ready, other than, we'll probably get into, if there's any repairs or any improvements that we need to do.
So approximately how much might that be?
I would say an oil tank scan could be under 1,000, maybe 500. And sorry, what was the other one?
The pre-home inspection.
A pre-home inspection. Same thing. I think a normal home inspection can run about $1,000. So I would say that's probably what you're looking at.
Would you say there's value in having that done in the sales process? Does it make it smoother?
It can make it smoother. I mean, it's not a necessity, and it really depends on the property. Greg, it really depends on the property, whether we think that's going to add value to a purchaser or, especially if you have a home that maybe has it has some issues, because that can identify to us, okay, where's the best money spent in terms of we need to get the house up to snuff, obviously, let alone doing improvements, but just getting it in a nice selling condition.
Right. So are there any other tips like staging a property or other methods you could use to best show the property for the executor?
Yeah, so for staging, we can either do physical staging or we can do virtual staging. So virtual staging has become quite a lot of clients love virtual staging because you can virtually stage a home even if it has furniture in it. But we do find in a lot of these estate sales that the furniture, by the time we list the property, the furniture has already been moved out because, beneficiaries are taking furniture, they're selling furniture. So in a lot of instances, we will do the virtual staging.
Right. And now sometimes very unique furniture would be a negative in showing the house, I would think.
Correct. Yeah. So, virtual staging is kind of the new way, and it looks great on the MLS listing, in the photos. So most of the time in an estate sale, I do find we do virtual staging.
And what's the cost of that?
It's sort of added into the whole, that's the realtor's expense. So we do professional photography, we do professional measurements, we may need to do drone photos, video, Matterport. And if we're going to do virtual staging, it just gets added into the cost of all our photography. So, that whole cost could run a realtor, depending on the home. It could be $1,000, it could be $2,000. It really depends on the home and the value of the home.
Well, thank you, Allison, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered individual legal, financial, or tax advice. Make sure to consult the advisor of your choice to advise you on your own circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Estate Matters. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow it on your podcast platform of choice.
Whether you are planning your own estate or you're acting as executor for somebody else's, Heritage Trust can help. Partner with Heritage Trust to protect your family, your assets, and your legacy.
If you would like more information about Heritage Trust, please visit our website at heritagetrustcompany.ca.
This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.